lady?
Somebody from the somebody from the IOC School Board.
That was the foundation.
I don't know. It was something.
Oh, I am not, okay. I was like, I have a couple emails that I haven't replied to.
No, Ellen and I should reply to this meeting. Another challenge next until next week. Can you send me some dates / times of work this week?
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the March 21st meeting of the Ames Community School District Board of Directors. I will call the meeting to order and entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
I move approval of the agenda with the following amendment of removing discussion item B, teaching and learning report.
Second.
Moved by Franzen, seconded by Becker to approve the agenda with removal of the teaching and learning item. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Passes 7-0. I'm going to be putting someone on the spot here because I forgot to ask anyone ahead of time. Director Beerbaum, would you like to read our purpose statement?
The Ames Community School District commits to equity and access that empowers every individual to reach their full personal and educational potential.
Thank you. We will move on to our first discussion item, which is our board committee update. And we had the mental health committee, which met on March 9th. We just had a couple of discussion items. We talked about the mental health screenings that had at that point taken place at the elementary schools. So students whose parents signed the opt-in form completed the mental health screener, and students who scored low on the screener met with a debriefer. Those who scored high met with a mental health clinician. That mental health clinician then contacted parents on the same day and additionally sent a follow-up mailing, snail mail, with information about telehealth and community resources. We talked about the middle school mental health screening, which was upcoming at that point. They have a window set for the week of March 28th. At the time of our meeting, they had 44 students signed up to be screened. And we talked about brainstorming ways to increase parent communication so that more students would participate. And then finally, we talked a little bit about the Heartland AEA Comprehensive School Mental Health System pilot, which is a program obviously through Heartland AEA. Deanie Thomas had filled out a survey indicating that Ames School District is interested in participating, and staff had a meeting with Heartland that week before spring break to understand what the program involves and how we could become involved. So we'll probably have an update on that at our next meeting, which will be on April 6th at 3 p.m. Any questions or comments on the mental health committee update? Any other board committee updates? Okay, and we do not have any community members signed up. So I will go ahead and move on to our next item, which will be the 2022-23 proposed budget. And Chris Stenslin.
Good evening. Is it working? Good evening, board. First, I just want to reassure everybody I am not sick. I was maybe a little overly enthusiastic about supporting the ISU women this weekend, so my voice is suffering a little bit. So tonight we're going to take our first look at the certified budget. And I think Eric has the presentation up. So, so what does the certified budget do? It's a document showing the amount of taxes that we're going to be levying for each fund in the aggregate and revenues and expenditures. The board does have to certify the budget by April 15th and file it with the county auditor and the Department of Management shortly after that. And we do have to hold a public hearing prior to adoption. So what are we really certifying? We're informing the public of the maximum we plan to spend during the fiscal year 23. When I say plan, because things change and there is an amendment process if we need to. And for instance, if we get a bunch of federal ESSER funds, we may have to amend the budget. And we're informing the public what the property tax rate will be for the July 1st, 22 through June 30th of 23 will be. We certify our expenditures. We really don't certify revenues. We just kind of inform the public what we expect our revenues to be, but we do certify our expenditures, and they are in 4 different control areas. instruction, support services, which includes administration, maintenance, and so forth. Non-instructional programs, which for the most part is our food service program, and then total other, which is our capital expenditures. We request the property tax dollars for all funds combined, and the tax rate requested is a total tax rate. It's not a tax rate by fund, but I do break that down. I'll show you what that is. What are we informing the public of but not certifying them? Well, we're informing them how we did in fiscal year 21. So we show them our actual revenues and expenditures. We inform them what we believe we are going to receive and spend in fiscal year 22. And we then inform them of what our expected revenues and expenditures will be for fiscal year 23. So what are some of the key variables in the budget? We've gone over some of these, but I'll just do a quick reminder. Certified enrollment is the first building block of the budget. We get that October 1st and the end of October 1st, special ed. So our certified enrollment went up 136 students. The second building block is supplemental state aid. The legislature did set that last month at 2.5%. We have dropout prevention budget, which we brought you in December. That's 100% property taxes. So that is part of our budget. We levy the max for the instructional support levy. If you remember, we certified that for 5 years, and we certified that a year ago for the next 5 years. And that provides us 10% of our regular program budget for instructional support. And we levy 4% of that in income surtaxes as opposed to property taxes. We do a cash reserve levy if we're allowed to by law. This year, we are levying the maximum we're allowed by law. We are getting to the top of what we're allowed to have in cash. So you'll notice, I want to point out that that's going down $3 million, and that's going to affect some of the numbers that you see in the future slides. So valuations come in usually the middle to end of December. We still continue to enjoy good taxable valuation growth. This year it was 3.4%. I'll talk a little bit about TIF valuation. TIF doesn't really affect the general fund. It affects debt service and capital. So it went down, but it had been going up significantly the last few years. So we'll look at some history on that as well. We have a board set PEPAL rate of $33, and we have a voted PEPAL rate that we vote in every 10 years of $1.34, and we levy that 100% property taxes. And then the only property tax that really is at the discretion of the board is for the management fund, but that is limited in what we can use it for, which is basically our property and liability insurance, our early retirement plan, and unemployment insurance. So this is what our revenues look like these are expenditures by fund. We are expecting the expenditures to go up in the general fund by about $445,000. Some of the reason that changes in as much as it could be is we got all those ESSER funds in 22. So that kind of skews that when you're getting one-time money. The one I would point out is the sales tax and facilities fund that combines our GO bonds and our sales tax into one line item. And the reason for that is as the high school is getting complete, those expenditures are going down. So you'll see that for fiscal year 23, we expect that to go down about 26 million. I can't say that exactly because that construction crosses that fiscal year, and it's always kind of a guess and what's going to happen with spring weather and how much they get done. And then we've had some of the supply chain, but that's where my best guess at this point is. Again, that might be one of those reasons you might have to amend the budget. Physical plant and equipment levy. I did get a new budget from Jerry Peters. I think with the high school wrapping down, he may have a little more time to spend on some PEPAL projects. So he's increasing that budget a little bit. And then the big increase is in the debt service fund, and that's due to that pre-levy that you approved at the last board meeting. And then I might explain why food service is going down, and this again might be an area we have to amend. But at this point, we are under the information that we will return to the traditional National School Lunch and Breakfast program based on eligibility. And because for the last 2 years, we have been providing universal free meals, our expenses have been more because we've had more kids eating, which is great. But I would expect as we go back to, based on eligibility, we might not have as many kids, especially eating breakfast. And so I'm estimating at this point that that's going to go back to more of a normal look before the COVID rules. Our revenues by fund, just a couple things to point out. I know that it looks like we're getting less money in the general fund. The reason that is so low is because of that reduction in the cash reserve levy. So that is revenue that it comes in as revenue. That's how it's recognized. It's, remember, we can't spend it. That's part of that spending authority. So our regular program dollars are still going up $1.3 million, but because of that decrease in that cash reserve, it looks like the revenues in the general fund are going down. I did go in and kind of at the last minute adjust the management fund up a little bit for property taxes because we got our property tax renewal. And quite honestly, the severe weather events across Iowa and across the nation, as well as some of the liability issues, have caused some stress on the insurance companies, and our renewal is a 20% increase. So I did go in so that we keep that fund balance where it is right now, which is enough to fund our expenses. All those insurance bills come due in July, so we have to have fund balance on hand to pay those when they come in. Again, the increase in the debt service is because of that increase in the pre-levy. Anybody have any questions? You can certainly, don't have to wait to the end. Okay. This gives a little bit of history on property tax rates, and I've got in the other documents that we're going to go through, I've got the rates going back far more years. But we have been at 1434 for about 10 years. This year, because of the reduction in the cash reserve levy, because of the increase in the valuations, and because of the change in the formula that changed the foundation aid from 87.5% to 88.5%, it shifted funding from property taxes to state aid because of that loss of that commercial industrial replacement. The tax rate is projected to go down just under 6 cents. And as we are at the 405 maximum on debt service, I would anticipate that that rate will start coming down a few cents a year now because we're levying in the max that we can for debt service. So how do we get to our general fund tax dollars? You can see the uniform levy. That's every school district levies $5.40 times their valuation. If you're a property rich district, that generates more revenue for you. If you're property poor, it generates less, and if it generates less, you get more state aid. If it generates more, you get less state aid. The additional levy is that difference between the 88.5% and the 100% of the student cost. We will be levying the max for budget or dropout prevention, although the budget guarantee does fall off. So that reduces the property taxes. Again, we're levying the max in cash reserve, and that's going to come down $3 million. And then the instructional support levy went up just slightly. So our property taxes in total will be going down in the general fund, $2.7 million. This will give you an idea. So our rate in the general fund is going down $1.26. However, we increase that that debt service levy up to the 405 maximum, as well as increase the management fund a little bit. That results in that just 5 cent, or just under 6 cent decrease. I apologize. I'm not going to try to make you read this. This is the actual publication form that will show up in the paper in a week. This, if you want to see what this actual attachment is, it's on the action item in the action for the budget. So you're just going to recommend or approve me to publish the budget and set the date of the public hearing. So what that form does, if we enlarge it, is it shows those actual re-estimated and budgeted revenues. it shows, sorry, Eric's trying, he's doing very well keeping up with me. It shows those actual re-estimated and budgeted expenditures. And you'll see arrows there by those 4 control areas. So you can see what makes up support services. All those things total down to that total line, and that's what we certify and what we're held to for the actual budget. And then this just shows that in a different way, how much we're actually certifying in each one of those areas compared to those 3 years. So the budget has to, you'll approve the budget for publication tonight. It has to be published in the paper 10 to 20 days, not less than 10 nor more than 20 days prior to the budget hearing, which will be on April 11th. You will have to adopt the budget prior to April 15th. We're doing that on the 11th. If we were on the budget guarantee, we would have already have passed that resolution, and we would have to send that to DOM by the 15th. And then I do anticipate a budget amendment because of some of those shifting timelines on the capital projects for the high school. So that has to be done no later than May 31st. So I'm working on what that budget amendment is going to be. Any questions to this point?
Chris, can you just elaborate a bit on the eligibility for the free and reduced lunch program changing? I didn't think I caught all that as you went by it.
So starting in March of 2020, when the governor closed schools, we went on the summer school program, which allowed us to do the free meals for students while they were not in school. And we did those grab and go meals all that summer. Normally, the summer program is, it can only be at eligible sites. Our sites are Meeker and Sawyer, and it had to be congregate feeding. So that was the first change that happened to that program, is that it was eligible all over town. We were able, actually, no, they allowed me to have it at Mitchell, Sawyer, and Meeker that first summer, but we could do the grab and go where parents could come pick meals up for their kids. Then that next fall, we went in, they continued the summer program, but they extended the eligibility to every school site. And so we were under, for 2021, we were under the summer program. And I know it gets a little bit technical, but it's a different meal pattern. That's why there's a distinction. And they made it available free for everybody for all of 2021 under that summer program. In the fall of 21, we went to the seamless summer option under the National School Lunch and Breakfast Program, which is typically for breaks of longer than 2 weeks, but they extended it for the entire school year. And we went back to those traditional meal patterns, which the summer program is a little bit larger than the elementary, but smaller than the secondary. It's one meal pattern. We went back to those meal patterns so under that, there is an eligibility under the National School Lunch Program in normal circumstances, where most of it comes through DHS through direct certification, and it determines based on your income level if you get free meals, whether you get reduced meals, or whether you are 100% paid. So we're a 30% free and reduced district, district-wide. So when parents have to pay for breakfast or lunch every day, we don't have as much participation. More parents send their lunch with their kids. This year, since everything's free, we've had higher participation, which is great. I wish this was the start of universal free meals. I don't anticipate that happening. I don't know if the federal government has the funding to continue it, or will allocate the funding. I shouldn't say they don't have it. We'll allocate the funding to the Department of Agriculture to continue that. But if I have never been qualified for free meals, I've had free meals for the last 2 years.
Right. So that does sound fairly complicated. I hope I'm not the only one that feels confused, but is it in general then that less students are being served free and reduced lunches who need them or want them?
No, if you're free, you're still going to get free meals. If you're reduced, it's 40% of the cost. And then if you're paid, then you pay 100% of that cost, and breakfast is like $280 and breakfast is like $340 or something like that. I don't even know the prices anymore. It's been so long since we've done it. So what I'm saying is that we have parents that choose, if I'm going to pay that every day, I'd rather send a sack lunch with my child. Doesn't mean the child's not eating. It's just different choices that families might make.
Right. So they're paying for their own lunch to send with their child rather than
Yes.
receive the lunch at the school.
Yes.
Okay.
I don't know if we have, when I was a kid, we used to go home for lunch sometimes, but I don't know if that happens much anymore. So there's not a very long period of time for lunch.
So Chris, just to clarify, because I think this is a pretty major shift if it goes through for our families. But the rules that we abide by are established by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And so it's not even something that happens at the state level. We have to follow the rules that come from the federal level. And there has been quite a bit of conversation nationally trying to advocate for this continued free lunch status, but there hasn't been traction at this point in time.
And at this point, we go back to the traditional summer school or summer program, summer feeding program, which means we go back to congregate feeding. We won't be able to do the grab and go meals. Meeker is going to be under construction this summer, so our only site is going to be Sawyer. But if you're not attending summer school, then you will have to bring your children in to sit in a congregate seating so I know there's a huge push for the grab and go meals because that is so much more convenient for parents than dropping their kids off to eat and then coming back and get them. I just don't know where it's going. So I budgeted based on the information that we have at this point.
Thank you.
I think as a parent, it's unfortunate. When you look at several years ago, we had conversations about lunch shaming and some of those things. And what you see now when you go to the elementary is I will not say all, many of the children go and they eat breakfast. It is not children who need breakfast because they're not getting it at home. It is everyone. And so I was sad because I did read something about how it's not getting traction at the federal level. And it's really unfortunate because I think it has provided, I look at it as an opportunity. It provides these young children opportunity to gather, they congregate, they eat before the day begins, and then they're ready to settle in and do their learning. So it's just a real loss that I wish the federal government would see it, but my understanding is the same as yours, Dr. Vincent.
In fact, I think I've heard some I'm forgetting the word, but just some anecdotal information that kids are eating breakfast at home and eating breakfast at school. So
Yeah, that was me. That was my child.
you're not the only one I heard that.
They are.
That's fine. That's great. Kids are hungry. I'm glad that's happening, but I don't know if the parents are as glad. But
So to clarify, Paula, the program is set by the federal government, and there's not any way for us to do more than that. I know we don't have like a lot of extra money, but we have to follow that exactly, or is there room
there's
to
no
do
legal way for us to put other money into the food nutrition
Gotcha.
program other than if we tried to fundraise somehow, and that's questionable whether that's even legal. So when we had the negative accounts, we put posts out to that. We have a lunch hero donation button on our web store, and we push it out and so a lot of times people would donate or churches would donate and help us with those negative balances, but never went directly into the program. It was mainly to get those negative balances off.
Okay, thank you.
So, Chris, you said that Meeker is allowed as a meal site, but Meeker will be under construction this summer. Is there any way to get an alternative meal site? So there are two meal sites?
It's all based on census tract information. So Meeker and Sawyer are the only two. In fact, that first summer I had to get special permission. Mitchell's sits just outside of a census tract, and they had done a waiver that would allow them because they were so close to a census tract, but those are the only two schools that qualify. In fact, the library has always qualified. Once you qualify for 5 years.
Okay.
And the library had always qualified, and their qualification ends this year, so we won't be able to have a site at the library either.
And it's based on poverty level in the census tract or what?
Yes.
So would it be possible for some other institution to provide that is also within the same census tract to provide a meal? I mean,
To be an alternative
to be an
site.
alternative site while Meeker is closed for construction?
Are you asking if we can run the summer program at a
Well,
different
I'm just
site?
wondering if there's a need for multiple sites, which I guess there has historically been multiple sites, is it possible to find a different site?
So
would also be in a
we've had
poverty
multiple
system.
sites in the past, but we've had summer school at the multiple sites.
Yeah,
This year's
okay.
summer school will only be at Sawyer.
I see, okay.
Because Meeker, so it's really sad to say, when the grab and goes, we had multiple sites because those were allowed under the national waivers. But when we were under the traditional summer program, we didn't have walk-ins. I mean, it was the kids that were attending summer school,
Okay,
so.
all right.
Chris, I have a question. I think I know the answer. I was just trying to think through it because somebody asked me it the other day. As far as I understand, I think the state is still considering some legislation that would change some property tax rates for some properties potentially in Ames, which would effectively change the taxable valuation potentially. If that happened and still and took effect for the next year, then we would just need to adjust our rates to still meet the amount for our budget, right?
I'm not sure what legislation you're talking about because I haven't.
There's some
heard.
legislation related to affordable housing that's looking at reducing the property tax rate on affordable housing across the state. I don't know if it made it through the funnel, but the last I heard, the city was looking at it because it's going to have an impact on their budget.
Normally, when they do that, they provide state aid to offset that. Now, for cities and counties are different. They don't usually replace the money cities and counties. But that it would shift within, other than PEPL and the debt service and so forth. But the legislature, if they don't replace it, has to be very careful, because if they would reduce it significantly, that would change that debt service levy. And we weren't able to meet the obligation that we have created for our GO bonds, that could put us in default on our bonds. So I'd be very surprised if they made it retroactive. My guess is they would make it effective they could make it effective as of January 21st, 2022, which would be the 23-24 budget.
Okay, that makes sense. Cool.
This budget's based on January 1st of 21.
Okay. No, thank you.
So another question, and thank you for, I spent some time this weekend looking all through this and thinking, I was telling Michelle earlier that I really hoped you gave a good explanation so I understood what was going on. I like numbers, but when you don't know exactly what they represent. So thank you. There's a lot of things I was like, okay, that's what that thing is. So I appreciate that. I guess I kind of want to ask big picture. Maybe this isn't, well, big picture / little picture. In terms of where we're decreasing funding and increasing funding, what are the things that are going to be most effective? I know that there were there's less funds per student and things like that. So, where are we making cuts?
Yeah, so one of the things that I should have mentioned at the beginning, because it's usually at the start of my my spiel, is this is the certified budget. The certified budget will not change. How we allocate the resources within that budget is still in development.
Mm-hmm.
So Dr. Vincent is working on what we call the new money budget, and she's been developing some staffing models. So those will be coming to the board.
Okay.
But regardless of what happens, unless the board chooses not to cut, which would cut into our spending authority, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about when we get to the other attachments, the budget itself does not change.
Okay.
So what you would certify, or what even you would adopt, won't change based on what we may or may not recommend. If there was a direction of cut this versus that, and it fell within one of those different 4 control areas, we may have to amend the budget a year from now. But because the allocation of those resources takes a lot more time and effort to create, usually the certified budget comes first.
Okay, so these are kind of the buckets that we're
Yes.
working from, and then the smaller, those line by line decisions come later.
So by
excellent.
By approving this for publication, and even if that's not done by the April 15th, you are agreeing to nothing as far as budget reductions, because the budget won't, if you decided not to reduce anything, that doesn't get us more revenue.
Right.
So the certified budget doesn't change.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Eric, if you could pull up the other presentation or the other attachment. So all of this attachment is the detail that fed into all those slides, but there were a few that I just wanted to highlight. I'd be happy to answer any questions on any of these pages. And yes, Director Beerbaum, I am doing my big budget book this year. I'm working on it. So getting the graphs updated is the hardest part. So I'm working on that, and we'll have that probably in May at some point. So Eric, if you could go to page 5, which is titled Property Valuations. So I just wanted to show, talk a little bit about evaluations. I told you we continue to enjoy good valuation growth. This page I like because it tells you where our valuations are coming from and what type of property. So there's a couple of different things to understand about when you're talking about property valuation. There's the appraised value of your house, which is what you want it to be and what you hope to sell it for. Hopefully it's what you want to sell it for. There's the assessed value, which is what the assessor thinks it's worth, which is usually quite a bit less than what the appraised value is, especially in this environment. And then there's the taxable value, which is the value that you pay your taxes on your house. And in Iowa, we have statutory things called rollbacks, which roll back the 100% value to a taxable value. And if you'll notice, our 100% value for our residential property is about 3.4 million. The taxable value of that is 1.8. And I'm going to go through how that might affect an individual house in just a second. So I just want you to understand when you're talking about valuations, we talk taxable valuations because that's what generates our revenue. That's not necessarily what your house is worth or what you're paying taxes on. It would be what you're paying taxes on your house. And the same for commercial, although commercial only rolls back to 90%, where residential is about 54%. So we'll go through those numbers. Any questions on the valuations? The next page, I'm not going to go through it, but that just gives you a little bit more history of what's happened with our regular taxable valuation and our TIF. And you'll notice that when I got here in 14-15, the TIF value was very, very small in this district, and it's grown. It reached its apex last year, and now it's starting to come back down again. And TIF is tax increment financing, which allows cities and counties to do developments that exempt those developments from taxes for a period of years. So you go to the next page. This is the tax rates again that just shows you, I had it on a slide, but it'll show you the amount of the tax rate and the dollars generated for the makeup of the general fund and then each of the taxable funds. So that just gives you your comparison there. And if you'll go to the next page, this is the one I want to spend a little bit of time on. And if you can get the 22-23 up. So at the bottom there, you'll see fiscal year 22-23. You'll see that tax rate decline from the 14.34 the year before to that 14.28 for fiscal year 23. And what I've laid out is the taxes on a $75,000 house, $100,000 house, and $125,000. And the only way this really works to demonstrate how the rollback and the tax affects anything is to assume the value of that house stays the same from year to year. I know that doesn't happen, but there's so many variables on what might increase or decrease a house's value. You might do an addition to it. You might, they're just so, I just leave them static to show what's happening to a property tax. So if you owned a $100,000 house in this year, you would have paid $739.60 for the school district's taxes. Now, I know that's not your total tax bill. That's the school district's portion of it. For next year, and you were taxed at 56.41% of your assessed valuation on your house last year. Next year, on that same $100,000 house, you will be taxed 54.13% because the rollback went down a little bit, and that tax rate went down a little bit. So next year, the school portion of the taxes will be $704. So a decrease of about $36 for that $100,000 house, assuming it was $100,000 last year and $100,000 next year. I I just try to show again, if you owned a $100,000 house 5 years ago compared to owning a $100,000 house for next year, you would be paying $24 less for that same house than 5 years ago. And a lot of it has to do with that residential rollback.
This is probably an area that I think board members may be aware of, but it is such a huge asset for this school district to have the property values that exist here in Ames. This is the envy of the state, I can assure you. Not very many folks can expect to see their taxes from the school go down consistently like this, or to be at this low of a rate. And you think about the huge construction projects that you have had going on top of this picture. It's just phenomenal. But again, thanks to a strong economy here, a strong commercial tax base, and we
And you
definitely
will find
benefit.
very, very few school districts that have a total tax rate of $14.28, and $4.05 of that is made up of debt. My previous district, we were at $17 and we had zero debt. So the next page, you can look at that. It gives the historical property rates and taxes back to 2013. If you could go to page 11, which is the aid and levy worksheet. The aid and levy worksheet is really about 130 lines long. This is the way I condense it. So it shows you the total amount of dollars that flow through our school district from the state aid formula. Now, it doesn't include all the federal funds and all the other funds, miscellaneous local revenues that we get, but this is what flows through the state aid formula. So next year, total district dollars will be $48.9 million. Of that, $15.4 million is reserved for those categoricals and can only be used for those certain purposes. The largest being special education, the next one being the next one that can't be used is that teacher salary supplement, which it goes 100% to teacher salaries. And then that bottom section then comes down to that $1.3 million that we've been talking about that the regular program generates. I just wanted you to see what makes up from the state aid formula all of our dollars. If you could go to page 14, which is unspent authorized budget report. So we had a presentation a few weeks ago, a few board meetings ago on unspent balance. This is the calculation of how we get to unspent balance. It's about as bad as the aid and levy worksheet. But this will give you the history of our unspent balance since 2013. It reached a low of $2.4 million in 2014, and then 2015. There was a significant error on the special ed supplement those years. I came in July of 15, so I finished up fiscal year 15. Fiscal year 16 was my actual first year. And I caught that error that year that I was finishing up the financial reports in September. And so if you look in fiscal year 16, about halfway down, you're going to see SBRC other allowable growth #1, and we had about $1.4 million come in. I went to the SBRC and asked for that money back that we had lost because of the error on the special ed supplement. So that's why it went down, and then it came back up a little bit. While the unspent balance, we're out of the zone where we're getting nasty grams from the DE telling us that if we don't watch what we're doing, we're going to go negative and they're not going to be happy. We still are not at a level that most school districts our size. Paul and I went through a few of them the other day, and most of the districts our size have between $15 and $20 million of unspent authority. So on the next page, one of the things that you do have to watch with your, and this is one of the things the state watches, is of that unspent authority, how much of it is grant funding that's carrying over from year to year that has to be used for those specific purposes, and therefore is not available. You're going to spend it at some point, and so it's not available for those one-time expenditures. If like we had some this year with the mid-year salary, hourly increases, and some of the positions we increased. And you'll notice we consistently hold about $1.5 to $1.4 million, of $1.4 to $1.5 million of grant funds in that unspent authority. And then I also put the information on the debt service that we went over last year or last meeting. I just, again, want to emphasize how much we are saving the taxpayers of Ames in interest by doing those pre-levies. That should be a point of pride. Most school districts, again, do not have the tax base to be able to do that. So I'd be happy to answer any questions at this point. I know this was a little longer presentation than you normally have. And feel free to email me or call me if you have any questions as you're going through it. I alluded to Dr. Bierbaum. This is only just a very small portion of my big budget book, which is about 200 pages. So we'll have that available to you in probably May. See how time goes for me to get it put together.
All right, thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Our next item is our 2022-23 school fees, and we'll turn it over to Dr. Hawkins.
Good evening, board.
Good evening.
A little simpler math to understand on this report. This is annually, we need to approve the fees that we plan to charge students for the next year. This is a replica of the fees that were approved last year with one exception, and that is the fee for kindergarten is being proposed to you to be the same as the other grades in our elementary schools. When I asked questions, so the process for bringing this to you was to present it to our, part of that process was to present it to our building principals. Our elementary principals were a little surprised at the idea that we were charging less fees for our kindergarten students. In their estimation, it costs just as much, if not more, to educate our kindergarten students as it does the other grades in our elementary schools. So I set about trying to find out why that would have been different. Historically, the closest I could get to was at one point we ran partial day kindergarten programs, and the thinking was maybe that was a holdover from those times. When I worked with our teaching and learning department to verify with them, is it truly cheaper to educate a kindergarten child? I was told no, it costs just as much as it does to educate a first through fifth grader. And so thus that suggested change. The only other change that I would want to point out, it's not actually listed as a change, but I would want the board to know that this year we chose as a district to pay for students to access the STAMP testing, which is the testing that students would participate in to get the seal of biliteracy from our high school. By us paying for that, it has dramatically increased the number of students participating as well as the number of tests passed by those students. And so we're excited about that. And so while it's listed as a fee that can be charged to kids, I would want to be transparent with the board that we have not chosen to apply that fee to students. So depending upon where the discussion goes tonight, when this comes back to you for action, that may be taken off of there if that's going to be something we choose to do permanently. Other than that, this is an exact replica of the fee structure that was brought before you last year. Could I answer any questions that you have about the proposed fees for the upcoming school year?
How much is the stamp testing?
I believe it is $20 per student and then $5 per subtest.
Great.
Typically, what I've been told is it runs us about $30 per kid.
Okay.
Looking at the policy for low-income students, the 503.3 and the fee waivers and all that, do you find that the process of students does that apply to activity fees and things like that, like getting into athletic events or any of those things?
It does not. No, the process for fee waivers does not necessarily apply. And Chris, I would invite you to correct me if I'm giving bad information here, but I don't believe it does apply to activity.
Okay, so it's mainly for the textbook fees.
Activity tickets are not a fee. They're a charge to get into an activity. We are not a pay-to-play state, so we don't charge students to participate. They don't pay a fee to play football. But the gate revenues are what help fund that, and the state feels that that's an optional thing for.
I guess there's two things, and one's a question, maybe one's a statement. One, the question, I guess, would be with the textbook fee, do we find that families that can take advantage of those waivers do take advantage of them? Like, is there any barrier there that we could help lower that would help families even more?
That is a difficult.
Would you like me to?
Go for it.
So these all flow through my office. We were worried about that this year with the universal free meals. What we are finding is that a higher and higher percentage of our qualified families is coming through direct certification through the Department of Human Services. When I first started, they only direct certified free. Now they direct certify free and reduced. They certify Medicaid, they certify foster care. So they've branched out trying to direct certify. So much higher percentage is coming through there. We get very few income applications. And so we were worried this year with not having to do one, but if parents knew, but we just didn't have that many call and say, hey, I think I'm qualified for free meals. I should have it waived, because we've got more and more of that coming. And so then there's nothing on the family's part to do. It comes direct certified. The only thing they have to do is they do have to accept the waiver. A family still has the right to determine whether they want their fees waived or not. So if I'm a family that I'm kind of on the edge and lunch is a real hardship, I want to accept the free lunch, but I can pay my fees. I might decline that waiver. And actually, we had one that got extended that shouldn't have been. A building secretary extended it, and the parent called and complained. They said, I want to pay my fees. I wasn't. Especially if a child is certified for Medicare or Medicaid, I'm sorry, that has nothing to do with family income. Mm-hmm. And anytime a child is certified for one reason, it extends to all children in the family. So that's the only thing they have to do is the waiver, which is part of our online registration.
Okay. And then I think the second one, and this I think we've talked about in the past, I continue to be, I guess, troubled or just unhappy seeing some of the activity fees that we have families pay, like just to come see a choir concert or things like that. I would really like to see if there's some way we can eliminate that as a barrier for families. Because like you said, we don't have waivers for some things like that, or we don't have waivers saying, hey, if your kid wants to come and watch high school football and basketball games, they don't need to pay. I think that's something we should take a look at somehow.
At least the students shouldn't, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think the students shouldn't. Also, personally, I don't think any family should have to pay to come see their student perform at like a concert. I know that then causes another budget issue, but I think that's where we could take, I don't know, like if we have the foundation going again, maybe the foundation could help raise funds to make it so you didn't have to pay to see a concert.
I appreciate, I was actually going to say it's either a funding issue or a fundraising issue.
Yeah.
And there are some things that you don't see on the fee structure that's presented tonight because clubs choose to fundraise for it rather than charge a fee for it. So there's a couple of different ways that we accomplish some of the things that go on for our students. But I do appreciate that. And I'm sure as a district, we can look into if we wanted to provide a community-wide effort to raise funds to provide for admission to events or the ability for children to again, it's not a pay-to-play state, so children have the ability to participate, but in some events, as we may know, it's pretty, some of the stuff to be a part of that can be expensive. So if we wanted to think about as a community how to raise funds in order to make participation easier, to have some of the stuff the participation would require, or to your point, I've always found our community to be a very giving one. I'm sure that they would be willing to chip in.
I mean, it's not something we're going to solve here, but I think it's something we should talk more about as a board. Because I know, especially like, as we talk about equity and community, we want to get the community more engaged and coming into our schools and feeling welcome. But if the first thing they do when they show up is we ask them for money, that doesn't feel very welcoming. And I think we can do better at that.
This actually gained a little bit of traction. It died in the funnel at the legislature. there was a bill that was proposed that would take the online sports gambling revenue and replace those admittance fees to activities. The DE tried to do a fiscal note on it. I think there was a lot of difficulties because they were saying, well, it was only for your kids. So what happens if the opposing school, their kids come? Do you charge them? How do you get, so there's a lot of issues, but I do think that it is getting some traction, and maybe there'll be some more movement from the legislature to find some way to fund some of those activities. We're not allowed to out of the general fund. That's illegal. And so honestly, fundraising and gate revenues are your primary revenues for those activities. And it just makes it difficult to, and again, do we have people just say, well, you have an Ames ID, you get charged, you don't get charged, you don't have an Ames ID, you do. What if you don't bring your ID? So
it's kind of odd to be in a brainstorming session right now with the board. At least I find that, but that is discussion. I have known systems that have chosen to have like a pass system. So kids or families could go to their school's office and get like a punch ticket pass that would get kids and family members in. So there's ways we could structure it where we would make sure that kids and families who wanted and needed that could get access.
So I realize we've derailed a little bit, but now I'm just curious. So if I go to a play and I pay for my ticket, where does that $10 go? Does it go to the theater kids to build their next set, or does it? It's been a minute since I graduated, and I know how it was then.
It goes in that particular. Well, it depends. I guess it depended if it was a musical or a play.
Okay.
If it was a musical, it'd probably go into. It'd be split between vocal, orchestra, and band, depending on who's supporting the musical from the instrumental side. If it's a play, it's going to go into the drama account. The statute requires us to have a student activity fund. It doesn't require us to have each individual activity accounted for separately. We do because teachers especially are very parochial, and if I'm raising money, I want it to be for my program. But especially in athletics, you have to recognize that there are revenue producing sports and there are non-revenue producing sports, and that there has to be a recognition that the revenue producing sports have to share with the non-revenue producing, not so much on the fine arts.
Yeah.
That's
more familiar to me personally.
Yeah.
Where that money goes. Yeah.
Since I opened this can of worms, maybe what I recommend is maybe this is something like budget and audit or some committee could kind of take up at some point in the next 6 months or something, just to start thinking about these issues, because I think we should be looking at all aspects of the system and how we can make it more accommodating for allowing all our students and their families to connect with the district. So
I will say the fee structure that you've seen for the last couple of years has gone through some rigorous conversations at our director's table in order to apply that same type of thinking to fees that might be associated with academics, right? So how do we find ways to make all of our academic options really accessible without associated fees? Even if the state says that they're permissible fees, it doesn't, sometimes those permissible fees may cause barriers. And so that line of thinking has really been vetted through our team when it comes to academic offerings. I appreciate the push to say those extracurricular opportunities to watch and engage in the school that way are just as important. So
I have a different question on a somewhat different topic. So we're paying for the stamp by literacy test. Was there a reason that we chose to go with a stamp by literacy test? And I see we also have fees for SAT, PSAT, and AP testing, but not do the same thing for those tests? I'm not suggesting we should pay for them. I'm just curious about how these decisions
great
happen.
question. To be really transparent, I'd have to defer to a colleague to answer that question. I don't know. I know, Aaron, that kind of puts you on the spot, but.
That's a great question. There's kind of two answers. One is that the seal of biliteracy can be tied to the graduation, the diploma, and the AP. We currently don't tie any part of the diploma to the AP test or the ACT or the SAT test. Also, the scale of it is pretty small at this point, and it's a much cheaper test. So I don't have the budget currently to support AP testing, although that would be an interesting thing to consider. The AP test, another layer of that is that some of our AP courses are also offered concurrent enrollment. So you can get the college credit without having to take the AP test. So that's another factor in thinking about that particular test. We did enter into conversations with ACT this spring. We're trying to get off the ground for the fall. We can actually offer quite a few waivers that ACT provides to us to offer to students to get a free ACT test. And we can also get some reduced testing costs if we become a testing center. So we've been starting to talk about how could we open a testing center at the high school in the fall. We're not equipped to do that this spring, but we're talking about next fall trying to get that going. So we've been having some of those same conversations around the other tests, but they're in initial stages, I would say, as to how we can better support kids to have access to those tests.
Okay. And in any case, right now, students are getting free and reduced price lunch. Kids are getting those tests free or half price.
I believe so. No.
Or no.
Not on the optional
Voluntary.
individual, so the ACT and SATs.
Okay.
The ACT we do have waivers for right now.
Through ACT though.
Through ACT,
Yeah, not
correct. The
not
district
the
isn't
free and
subsidized.
reduced waivers.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the free and reduced waiver are intended for fees that apply to all students.
Okay. Oh, I see. They're not for voluntary purchases. I see.
Right, yeah, so essentially any waivers or reductions are really up to the College Board and to ACT. They're not. So we can seek the waivers, but we're not necessarily in control of what those fees, what their fee structure is or who it applies to.
Do we have the ability to pick up the cost for students that would otherwise apply for, that maybe we don't have waivers for the SAT? Just curious if that's illegal.
Well, not in my current budget.
Right.
I wouldn't know without doing some more examination of what are those total costs, and we haven't budgeted what that would cost.
I'm just
us,
curious.
so.
You don't have to go look it up or anything.
Okay. So yeah, so off the top of my head, I don't know, but we could find that answer out, but we haven't budgeted for that in the past.
Typically, we can't pick up fees that benefit individual students. And so since the SAT isn't something that every student's going to take, or the ACT isn't something that's usually not something that we can use our general fund fees or general fund revenues to cover, because it benefits individual, and it's really basically for college admittance. So that's the way that the state looks at it, is our fees are based on things that they need for their education with us.
And is that why a stamp is different, because it's tied to the diploma? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, the seal of biliteracy goes on our Ames High diploma.
Gotcha.
Mhm.
Well, that stinks because those are barriers.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions about the proposed fee structure for next year?
Anything
I
else?
want to
that'll
be clear, I
left
don't disagree with you. I'm just.
Yeah, no, I know. You just get to be the Debbie Downer, right?
My new nickname.
All right, thank you, Dr. Hawkins.
Thank you.
Okay. I will go ahead and open our public forum, and I'll read our statement on public comments. Residents of the district, students attending the district, parents or guardians of students attending the district, and district staff members may address the board about any topic relevant to the district, whether on the current agenda or not. Those who wish to speak must sign up at the beginning of the meeting. Speaker participation is limited to 3 minutes once per item. The views and opinions of citizens addressing the board do not necessarily reflect those of the board, district administration, or staff. Speakers are to remember that Iowa law prohibits the board from discussing specific employees, students, or their performance. Student speakers will state their name and school. Others will state their name and address. And we have Valerie Nyberg. You might need to turn it on.
I think it's working. So my name is Dr. Valerie Nyberg. I live at 4239 Stonebrook Road. So good evening, ACSD board, colleagues, and Ames families, Dr. Vincent. I'd like to start by thanking you for giving me the opportunity to speak before you today. I've had a lot of time in the past 5 months to think, feel, and pray. I address you tonight with the desire to promote a better sense of understanding, which will hopefully prompt further growth and development. I initially started this letter on September 30th. Even then, I knew I would leave the Ames Community School District at the end of the school year. I wrote, I have decided that it's in my own best interest to resign effective at the end of the school year because I no longer feel safe, nor do I feel heard in my current position. Please allow me to explain. Searching for perspective and strategies to meet the needs of both the Ames High staff and students last summer, I took a course called Supportive Engagement, Building Social Emotional Resilience through Drake University. Put simply, I learned that we all wear masks. Our masks are created through our experiences of and responses to the trauma and or stressors we've experienced from birth onward, and informs our primary strategies for how we interact with others. Ames community, the children are hurting. I can't emphasize this loudly enough that their behaviors are a manifestation of the pain, hurt, and disenfranchisement they feel and their current understanding of how the world works, often heavily mediated through their algorithm-driven social media consumption. Their behavior is their mask. This is acutely true for the most marginalized students, students of color, students living in poverty, students who identify on the LGBTQ spectrum of sexual and gendered identity, English language learners, and our neuro-unique learners. As principal at Ames High, I often saw various ways students try to communicate their discomfort, uncertainty, and their sense of not belonging. Ames is a community where many students don't feel that way. However, there is a growing number of students who are the canaries in the coal mine. They are a signal for how the educational system and the community are not meeting their needs. Put another way, the textbook for the course states, countless teachers have come and gone who are convinced student behavior is designed solely to push their buttons and irritate them. That type of conventional wisdom says that students are out to either get something or avoid something. Such a view of behavior leaves little chance of seeing what is actually behind the behavior. In some cases, student behavior could be influenced by unprocessed feelings, trauma, boredom, or more likely a lack of skills. You don't know until you build a connection and relationship. Our job as educators is to conquer our own prejudices, implicit bias, so that we can meet students where they are and help them, as well as ourselves, to grow stronger and better every day. I'm sure I'm not alone in thinking about the recent shooting at East High School. As Superintendent Dr. Thomas A. Hart said, Des Moines can't afford to lose a single child. Agreed. The loss of a child and all that he, she, they may bring to the community is truly a tragic event. Having said that, I want to acknowledge that it is every school board, every school leader, every family, every student's greatest fear to experience a school shooting. That feeling is palpable. However, it's important to note that rather than scapegoating and pointing fingers, Des Moines is choosing to respond with hope and access. Talking about the degree that the community needs to come together to help kids change their mindsets, learn skills to deal with conflict, and find other ways to handle life besides through fighting and retaliation. Like the members of Cure Violence and Urban Dreams, I believe that hope, teaching, learning, and support are ways to improve both our school and community that surrounds it. The Ames Community School District purpose statement is, the Ames Community School District commits to equity and access that empowers every individual to reach their personal and educational potential. However, it appears that making adults comfortable and appearing to do something is more important than ensuring that these students have full access and opportunities to reach their personal and educational potential. Instead, they are further disenfranchised from the educational process through up to 5-day suspensions, night school, and other satellite ad hoc programs without the benefit of receiving services through a consistent system of in-building interventions and or supports prior to alternative placements. Allow me to clarify. It took me several years as an administrator to recognize that not every student is well served in a large comprehensive high school setting. It's not the large high school's fault necessarily, nor is it the individual's personal failure or lack of desire for success that makes the need for a smaller alternative way of learning necessary. It's both shocking and appalling that in 2022, Ames hasn't invested in a structure that recognizes the need for formal parallel pathways for students to seek and earn their high school diploma. It's even more shocking that the district provides no guidance, nor does it help to establish relationships with entities in the community that can help students with IEPs and significant social and emotional health needs to continue their education outside of the school. There are models for this work in neighboring states. One program's vision statement says, "We will meet you where you are. We will be what you need. We will walk further with you. We will stand strong with you." With social workers, student advocates, and other supports, this program works with At Promise youth, achieving 96% graduation rate for the most vulnerable students. It can be done, Ames. If our responsibility is to educate, how is it that we can that adults can celebrate getting their school back when doing so means sacrificing students' access, opportunities, and educational rights? People in key places must make children the priority, not politics, not fear, and not their own preferences. In October, I was put on an intensive plan based on distortions, the very next day on administrative leave, citing the need to investigate my leadership. Though I was never told any specifics, the Ames Tribune article cited a video that AHS students took of my reaction, or lack thereof, to a student. 2 days before this incident, the entire AHS staff attended de-escalation training, where the main point was that as adults, we need to maintain our own regulation if we're going to effectively de-escalate students. That's exactly what I did. I maintained a regulated, measured response to a rational, emotional student and attempted to get the student to come to my office rather than confront the student in an open space around multiple students and adults. The more I reflect, the more certain I am that my actions were right. I wanted to model for a segment of students who feel like walking away from aggression is impossible. For staff, I wanted to show that even when students are at their most heated, they rarely actively try to hurt adults. For this, I was removed as principal. Had I been able to follow up the student and his, her, or their guardian, we would have worked together to get the student the help he, she, or they needed, while emphasizing the importance of maintaining access to education and the transformative influence that education can have to change students' life trajectory. Our society and culture experience an accelerated degree of change and growth. How we respond to those changes matters. If we give into prejudice, fear, and distrust, how do we create a better tomorrow? Honoring tradition doesn't mean denying current changes and/or the implications those changes have on the future. In the months since my removal, I've had a lot of time to think, read, and reflect. I recently learned of a phenomenon called the glass cliff. This term was created in the early 2000s to understand and explain situations where women, keep in mind white women, were brought into leadership positions in Fortune 500 companies during a time of revenue or stock decline, management disarray, and/or scandal. Often these women failed not because they weren't competent, talented, and/or dedicated. Rather, they failed because they were brought in under the notion of change, yet the change wasn't truly important to the organization. Or they faced the mounting challenges, yet were given few tools or supports to meet and overcome those challenges. Lastly, they were responsible for leading a body of work that was inherently difficult and came with built-in resistance, yet weren't given the time and ability to build relationships and trust, which are key ingredients for any culture change. In July 2020, I came into a circumstance of all three barriers. That's what it meant to become principal at Ames High. Like many women and minorities, even when we work hard, play by the rules.
Dr. Nyberg, I'm sorry to interrupt you. We've had three-minute allotments. If you can try to wrap it up in the next 30 seconds.
I'm literally almost done. But thank you. I appreciate the extension. Even when we work hard, play by the rules, do our best to contribute, we can find ourselves in situations where we are treated unfairly, denied the ability to speak, and are assumed of wrongdoing or incompetence when the truth is we never had an equitable opportunity to begin with. I stand before you not as a failure, but as a survivor of a situation I didn't create and wasn't adequately supported. I was expected to be successful without being given the tools and structures I requested to help accomplish that success. Like the AHS students who have been pushed out of Ames High are currently receiving a second-tier educational experience, I found myself in an environment hostile to my efforts, resistant to hearing my voice, and seeing the multitude of positive steps I had taken, all the while championing purported goals of equity and inclusion. I leave Ames with my head held high. After all, I made history here in Ames. I was the first woman and the first Black high school principal. I was unanimously selected as the #1 candidate by the various representative groups to lead Ames High. I am the 2019 SAI Secondary School Associate Principal of the Year, also a historic milestone as a first Black female honoree. No matter how much is done to undermine and erase the significance of my accomplishment, I will continue to vehemently advocate for all students, especially the most vulnerable students. I hope future leaders of the Ames School District will provide leadership and scaffolding of comprehensive supports necessary for true success in providing equitable educations for all. And I hope that as you learn more, you do better. I wish you and the incoming superintendent, Dr. Julie Slauson, the best in your future endeavors. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Nyberg. We do not have anyone else signed up to speak this evening, so I will go ahead and close our public forum, and we will move on to our consent agenda.
I move approval of the consent items.
Second.
Moved by Beerbaum, seconded by Winfrey. Superintendent Vincent.
We have one gift to acknowledge this evening. It's an anonymous gift to the food pantry of $150. And given our earlier conversation, just want to once again acknowledge how fortunate we are to be in this community, and with the needs for food security, our experience suggesting we might experience more need. We just very much appreciate these gifts, even in a year when we have some resources that we may not have going to the future. So thanks once again to this anonymous donor, joining many, many others, and with great appreciation.
Thank you. It was moved by Beerbaum, seconded by Winfrey to approve the consent agenda. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Passes 7-0. Moving on to our action items, we have the master contract between the Ames Education Association and the Board of Education for July 1st, 2022 through June 30th, 2023.
I move the board approve the wage reopener agreement between the Ames Education Association and the Ames Board of Education.
Second.
Moved by Franzen, seconded by Beerbaum. Discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Passes 7-0. The 2022-23 proposed budget and setting the date and time of public hearing.
I move the board order the board secretary to publish the proposed 2022-2023 budget and to set the date and time of the public hearing for April 11th, 2022 at 5:30 p.m.
Second.
Moved by Beerbaum, seconded by Titus. Discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Passes 7-0. Authorization of payment facilitator Payrix Solutions LLC.
I move the board authorize Payrix Solutions LLC to act as the online payment facilitator for the Ames Community School District.
Second.
Moved by Winfrey, seconded by Franzen. Discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Passes 7-0. Materials adoption for Heritage Spanish.
I move the board approve the materials adoption for Heritage Spanish as presented.
Second.
Moved by Smith, seconded by Becker. Discussion?
One comment made during the discussion when we had this before the board was that there was going to be additional information sought, even though we had, through the screening, brought it down to one set of materials. I didn't know if the board might like to have a brief report on that, or if you'd like to have that in writing. I think Ms. Miller could comment this evening. Just wanted to bring it up, but we haven't taken that one full circle, and would want to offer that opportunity if you wanted that before you voted. Or it could come back in a different format.
Director Miller, do you want to just give us a real quick update? Thank you.
So I have a few slides. So we had gotten the survey back with 4 community members, parents that identified themselves and gave some feedback, a staff member who was not one of the original screeners. And then we had Shirley Santiago was able to visit a class of students, many of whom speak Spanish, and so they also filled it out. So that's how we got 14 students to look at it. There's some strengths that we got from the responses, lots of general positive, like, yep, looks good kind of things. And then you can see some of the more specific comments I was especially pleased that folks felt like it would reflect lots of different cultures and help students feel connected. There was a comment there that I'll leave up for a minute for those of you who speak Spanish. Nope, that was the right one. Yes. And then you can flip to the translation here. Okay, so there was a student who said, yep, these are really interesting topics, and specifically talking about the customs and traditions for students. There were a couple of considerations that we'll have to think about as we move forward into the adoption phase. There was a student, I think it was a student who said, some of this looks really easy, maybe kind of boring. So if you remember, there were lots of different levels, and we'll have access to levels 2 and 3 even online. So the teacher will just have to be really careful about making sure that they're selecting appropriate materials as we go. And then there was a comment from a community member or parent who said it really is important that a native speaker teaches a course like this. And we're very lucky to have Monica came last time, and she's a native Spanish speaker. And so as long as she's available, we will have her, we'll be able to accomplish that. So those were the big highlights from the surveys that we got back.
Thank you, Erin.
Thank you. All right, it was moved by Smith, seconded by Becker. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Passes 7-0. The policies for action.
I move the board approve the policies as presented.
Second.
Moved by Winfrey, seconded by Smith. Discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Passes 7-0. New Ames High School construction project change orders.
I move the board approve the change orders for the New Ames High School construction project as presented.
Second. Moved by Franzen, seconded by Limkaitis. Discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Passes 7-0. Board and staff items. So items from the board, we had a bit of a, I guess, murky conversation around the school fees. So I'm not real clear what, if anything, as a board we're asking staff to do.
I would be interested in what the cost implications would be for, I mean, it may be that we cannot personally, or as a board, that we can't pay for it out of the general fund. But the question is, how much would it cost to cover SAT and ACT fees per year for students who are on free and reduced price lunches, as well as AP tests? So just a rough ballpark or a rough estimate of how many students who are on free and reduced price lunches per year do we have who might take the SAT and ACT, and perhaps we have fewer of them taking them because that's not covered. So maybe just how many graduating seniors a year do we have who would be eligible, who are in this category, and how much would it cost in terms of budget? Then another question is, are there any monies that can pay for it? If not, then it would become a question of, is there a need for community fundraising?
So my understanding, Chris, from what you said is that it would not be something that we could cover. It would have to be through fundraising.
It couldn't come out of the general fund, right?
And
Well, there's no other fund that we could pay for
those
it out of,
fees
right?
don't necessarily flow to us. They pay the college boards directly. So I'm not sure that I would even have the information
Right.
to know. I mean,
I guess the question is, how many students, say in one class of graduating seniors at Ames High, how many students we have on free and reduced price lunches?
that
30%.
Yeah.
Yeah, 30% is
30%, and then the question is, how much is the, I mean,
Yeah,
it's pretty
we
easy to
can
figure out what-
gather the informational data for you pretty easily. We have to
Right.
register students for AP tests sometime in October. So we probably have the number of students. We do have the number of students taking various tests this spring already registered. We have, the state does a great job of keeping track and count for us of the number of students to take the ACT test annually. So we can get all of the data for the board as to how many students are taking which tests. And what are the fees of those tests? I don't know that from an ACT standpoint, I'd have to think about the ACT reports we get, whether we could break that down by which students taking it are seniors, juniors. I'm trying to think about the way those ACT reports come back to us, but we may be, if you're only interested in senior level data, we certainly could do that for AP tests. We might be able to do that for ACT as well. But I think the key will be then, knowing that it's not a permissible use of our funds to buy something for a specific child not associated with their diploma. What are the strategies we want to use to leverage that? It sounds, I'm hearing maybe that our foundation used to help support that. That might have been prior to my time in the district, but
I don't know.
And I don't know that you
there's
even
discussion.
need,
Sorry.
I don't know that you even need the data of how many are currently taking the test. It would just be the number of students on free and reduced lunch who potentially could take it.
Yes.
Because the
And
assumption is
budget
maybe there are students who aren't taking it
Right,
because of the cost. So just the number of
yeah, right. So, I mean,
seniors on free and reduced lunch. which
yeah,
is
so the
about
number of seniors
30%.
on free and reduced price lunch times the cost of taking the ACT or SAT.
Yeah.
Or AP tests. Presumably there are some students who would also be interested in AP
Yeah.
tests.
Might I suggest? It is not a prerequisite to take an AP test to be in an AP class, but the vast majority of students who take an AP class do participate in the AP coursework. Might I suggest that if we're looking at AP information, particularly, we look at seniors who are free and reduced who are also enrolled in AP classes.
Yeah.
That might be a better calculus for us.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like there should be a way to get this funded, even if not through our general fund.
I mean, I think one thing we need to take into account as part of the larger discussion, maybe we might be cart before the horse, is the real question is what barriers exist in the academic process of helping students achieve their full potential that could be helped to be overcome. And is ACT and SAT one? I mean, it's one if you happen to be trying to get to college and don't do that anyway, but it might not be the biggest ones, right? So I think maybe this is part of probably a larger discussion that's probably like after this summer meeting, like maybe after we get through the equity planning that's going on, the equity strategic plan. This sounds like a great next step for an equity committee like next year of looking at what are structural barriers in the way to our students succeeding and how do we identify them and think through them and work as a district to knock them down. I mean, that's kind of the general way, you know.
I agree with that, but I don't think that means we shouldn't look at that now, right? Because I think it's, if we kind of push off, let's plan and let's look at big picture, there's little things that we know that could be barriers that maybe we could be fundraising for.
And I'm not saying don't look at those. I'm saying like, let's not just look at that one and celebrate that. Like,
Oh, no,
there's the
obviously
bigger
not.
thing we need to do.
Yeah.
And then I guess for the question I had asked about activity fees, basically the way I might think about it is more generally stated, again, what barriers might be getting in the way of allowing our families and students to engage with the district? I could say, well, let's take that to the equity committee, but I think all our committees really are looking at equity right now. So I would maybe be interested to see if that's something the budget and audit committee might think about looking into at some point in the future, just because it's a budgetary issue. As we said, you know, where the money has to come from somewhere. We've got activity funds where we need money to do things. How do we handle this? I don't think any of us know the answer. I don't think any of the staff necessarily do. I mean, it sounds like there's some ideas. So I don't see that as a near term, like, hey, here's the information to come back to. I think it's more a challenge that maybe, I don't know. Is there any committee that would want to take that as something to start thinking about later this year? Or not?
It's directly related to budget, but again, what I hear, I think you saying is that would have to be also something that would be done through external fundraising. So,
I mean, there's two sources of funding basically for the student activity. One is gate revenues and the other is fundraising.
Yeah.
There's some, we can collect dues if they're like, if students are joining national organizations like Future Farmers of America and so forth. But for the most part, those are your two revenues.
If, I mean, maybe this is the first question for budget to look at is how much money would be lost if we didn't charge students, like, you know, just students, let's say, people with an Ames ID, a ticket price or door price. And so that we could see how much money we would need to make up if we were to waive those gate fees.
I'm almost guessing that Chris's budget book that's going to come in May would have some of this, would it?
No, because we collect a gate fee. We don't collect a gate fee from students. We don't
Yeah,
collect
it's
a
not
gate fee from
subdivided.
adults. We, you know,
Right.
so.
Parents of a player versus community members. Or,
Yeah, so I can tell you on a, how much we collect from activity passes. And then I could go through each sport and see what gate takes are, but that's not gonna tell you how much is coming from students.
Yeah, I mean, maybe just the starting number is how much is fundraising versus how much is gate, gets a starting point.
So for.
And I'm not on budget, so I just throw ideas
Because
out.
there's all the different, there's athletics, there's the different fine arts, there's the different buildings.
And I'm completely fine if this isn't actually a request to staff of something, but it's more of a catalyst for just board members to start thinking about this and be considering this as we're moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, I
because-
just keep thinking foundation on both of these things.
Well, I mean,
So,
And that's where the number helps, right? If we know how much money we need to raise,
Well,
then that can get us.
How about we take a stab at seeing what data we might have that we can get our hands on fairly quickly, but along with that, the future consideration type idea that we might plant with each of the committees. I mean, they each might come at that with a little bit different lens. So it might be a little bit of both and, if that makes sense. I think we could get some data,
Yeah.
get some start.
Just, a starting point.
so just data on how much we collect through gate fees for like different categories.
I'm hearing the big question that Director Beerbaum planted about what are those barriers to us reaching our purpose statement as it relates particularly to student participation in activities, testing. Maybe there's a longer list, but we could see what we have and at least get a start with some data.
and families' engagement in some of them too.
Families too.
I mean, I was kind of flippant when I said it, but it's kind of this concept of we want to get families and students into the building to participate. What are the places where we charge them for that participation?
Right.
I mean, that seems like a starting point.
Well, there's.
I'd like this to stay high level at this point to just create to educate all of us on just the high level price of how much money we're talking about. I think being an individual that also volunteers in supporting some of the fundraising efforts, I tread carefully on this. I appreciate and fully support the idea of it, but we're talking about these. I mean, I can think about any of the activities I've gone to in the last 3 weeks and how much money I get it, but those are money that, whether it's the fine arts or the athletics, that they're all really relying on to be able to provide all of our kids great opportunities. So if we could keep it high level and help us to understand how much time and effort that would require of you, I would be supportive of that.
I agree.
And this is really a middle school, high school issue. Anything that you might be paying at elementaries is going through the PTOs.
All right. Any other items from the board?
Madam President, I'd like to make a statement.
Okay.
At the last school board meeting, a representative of the Ames Youth and Schools Action Team, ASAT, asked the board of directors to recall the 7 young students of color who stood before the board a month ago now, detailing how a number of them had been unfairly disciplined during a recent incident at Ames High. The ASAT member implied that the board had done nothing in response in the intervening 2 weeks since the young women made their presentation. I felt frustrated by the implication that nothing had been done. I know personally that I sought out the students during the break in our meeting that night and expressed my anger and dismay at what had occurred. I then spoke with Anthony Jones, asking him if there was any way we could highlight these statistics that bear out the students' contention that Black and brown students are indeed disproportionately disciplined in comparison with their white peers, and to make clear that this is not just an inequity specific to Ames. No, it is a nationwide phenomenon. And it's not because Black and brown students are more prone to misbehavior than their peers are, or that they are somehow more naturally deviant. No. It is because racial stereotypes and prejudice exist in our culture that encourage all of us to be more suspicious of persons of color and more likely to attribute nefarious motives to their actions than we are to the actions of their fellow white students. Surveys, studies, and tests have borne this out again and again. The reason that we have a race issue in our schools is because racial prejudice exists in our schools. I then asked Dr. Jones if the text of the students' comments made at the board meeting that evening could please be emailed to all board members and to our superintendent. The email promptly arrived the next morning. Upon receiving it, I responded to the students via email, applauding their courage in speaking out and expressing my hope that reconciliation and healing might take place. I don't know if my fellow school board members replied to the email, but knowing them and their character, I certainly believe that some, if not all of them, did. I then communicated with Board President Sabrina Shields Cook and Vice President Michelle Lankaitis, and later with Superintendent Paula Vincent, about the feasibility of presenting updated discipline statistics, for lack of a better term, at each board meeting going forward. As it turns out, the possibility of doing so is more complicated than it sounds, and that discussion, therefore, is ongoing. Those then are just some of the steps that have been taken. So one could understand why I was frustrated with the implication that nothing has been done. But here's the thing, it is not enough. As an all-white board, we must do more than merely request data and offer sympathy. And I'm speaking to myself here as much as to anybody else. By virtue of our elected office, we're required to keep this critical issue before our schools and our community, because frankly, it's way more than just an issue. It's our children who are at stake. And yes, I said our children. Every young person in our schools belongs to us, and we belong to them. And in these relationships, we cannot pretend that race doesn't exist. We've all made it exist because of the unjust distinctions we regularly make between one another. We've made this problem, and so we're responsible to fix it. And while I cannot speak for my fellow board members, we make it a point not to do that. I nevertheless guess that we're on the same page of our mission statement when I say that I, for one, am hereby committing to the Ames Youth and Schools Action Team that action is what will indeed occur, not mere words. It's no secret that our new superintendent will be on board soon. Let Dr. Lawson be assured that it is not his job alone to deliver enlightenment and equity to the Ames Community School District, just as it is not Dr. Anthony Jones' job alone to do so. It's all of our job to be accomplished together. And so finally, on a personal note, I would like the active assumption about this board to be not that we are somehow squandering, ignoring, or shirking our responsibility on this vital front, but rather that we are diligently working. Thank you.
Thank you, Brett.
Thank you. I had one item. We got a letter from a community member today asking about how to re-engage with discussion about naming of the pool. I know there was quite a bit of community support a number of months back on this topic. And I was wondering if staff could maybe just put some thought into that and maybe reach out to that individual, maybe some individuals in the past that had asked us maybe 6-9 months ago, and just kind of give them some information on what that process would be like, how they can re-engage in that. I know we had expressed some support in that direction before, but starting back into that process, I think would be timed well with the opening of the school.
Thank you. Any other items from the board? Items from the superintendent?
Very quickly, today, just because we can say it, I would just share with you that as of this morning, we had 0 staff and 0 students reportedly out with a COVID infection. Don't know our ability to have all the current data in front of us, but that's what we have now. And we are, I believe by all measures that we can account for more similar to a July type status in the community. And so we can just enjoy that for as long as we can enjoy it, right? Even as we hear of things going differently again in other parts of the world. Just wanted to also note that our business office and HR staff have been working heavily on seeing through the teacher retention payment that you all approved to go to all of those staff, and probably that will occur. We may be able to certify that as soon as tomorrow. So we'll see. We're down to the last person to respond to us so that we can do that. And then finally, just a note of appreciation, wanted to acknowledge all those who helped work on the association agreement. Our association leadership entered collaboratively into that work with all of us at the district staff, even as they advocated for positions that might differ among us. They kept the broad interest of students and student welfare in front of them. And because of that mutual goal that we shared, we were able to bring an agreement relatively quickly. And I think that just is kudos to them and their professionalism, and just wanted to acknowledge that. That's all that I have.
All right, we'll move on to the board planning calendar. We do have a work session next week on the 31st with IASD. That one is at 5:30. And then our next regular meeting will be April 11th, and that one will also have a work session. All right, well, I will entertain a
I
motion
move we
to
adjourn.
adjourn. Second. Moved by Beerbaum, seconded by Ling Titus. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Passes